The bullet left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second. It crossed 412 meters of freezing mountain air in less than half a second. And when it struck, the man at the base of the ridge dropped without a sound. His fingers still curled around the trigger of the PK machine gun that had been seconds away from cutting down 3 wounded Americans. No one saw Claire Harlan take the shot. She was already chambering the next round, her cheek welded to the stock, her breath invisible in the sub-zero temperature, because she had learned to exhale through her nose, downward into the snow beneath her hide. The scope's reticle settled on the second target. A spotter crouched behind a boulder, adjusting his radio. She watched him key the handset, watched his mouth move, watched the fog of his breath rise into the gray dawn. She fired again. The man slumped forward, and the radio tumbled into the snow beside him. 2 shots, 2 kills, and somewhere behind her, for SEALs were still alive because of it. But that moment, that frozen breath of perfection, had cost her everything to reach. Not the training, not the selection pipeline, not the physical toll of dragging her body through miles of freezing water and jagged rock. It was the team itself that nearly destroyed her. If that opening hooked you, stay with me. This story only gets more intense. Subscribe now for more incredible true stories of courage, and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Claire Harlan arrived at the compound on a Tuesday morning in late October, carrying a rifle case that weighed 31 pounds and a duffel bag that weighed 62. The sky was the color of wet concrete. The wind cut sideways across the gravel lot, kicking dust into her eyes. She did not blink. The man waiting for her was Master Chief Ryan Calloway. He stood near the armory door with his arms crossed, a clipboard tucked under one elbow, and a face that had been carved by 2 decades of deployments into something that no longer registered surprise. He watched her approach. He did not offer to help with her bags. "Harlan," he said, "Master Chief." He looked at her for a long moment, not with hostility, not with welcome, with the kind of assessment that a surgeon gives to a scalpel before deciding whether to trust it. You know what you're walking into. It was not a question. Claire set her bags down. The rifle case she kept in her hand. "I know what I was told." "And what were you told?" "That this is the best sniper element in the teams. That you don't lose men. That you don't miss shots. That you've turned down 7 candidates in the last 2 years because they couldn't hold the standard." Calloway's expression did not change. "And did they tell you that you're the first woman to make it through the pipeline into this element?" "They did." "Did they tell you what that means?" Claire met his eyes. "It means nothing. Not to me. Not to the bullet." For a fraction of a second, something shifted in Calloway's face. It might have been approval. It might have been pity. It vanished before she could name it. "Follow me." He turned and walked toward the barracks without looking back. Claire picked up her duffel and followed. The barracks was a long, low building with concrete walls and windows that hadn't been cleaned since the last administration. Inside, 8 bunks lined the walls. 7 of them were occupied by gear, clothing, cleaning kits, and the accumulated debris of men who had lived together long enough to stop caring about personal space. The 8th bunk was in the corner, nearest the door, farthest from the heater. The mattress was thin, the frame was rusted, and someone had scratched a word into the metal rail. Claire didn't look at it. She already knew what it said. She dropped her duffel on the mattress and began unpacking with mechanical efficiency. Behind her, she heard the barracks door open again. Footsteps, multiple, the sound of men entering a space they owned. She did not turn around. "That her?" A voice, low, unimpressed. "That's her." Another voice. "Doesn't look like much." "None of them do." Claire finished unpacking her cold weather kit and slid it into the locker beside the bunk. She straightened. She turned, for men stood near the door. The one closest to her was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that had been broken and reset at least twice. His name Taper Vance. Behind him stood 3 others, shorter, leaner, with the coiled stillness of men who knew how to wait for hours without moving. Vance looked her up and down. "You're Harlan?" "Yes." "Cole Vance. I'm lead spotter for this element." "I know." His eyebrows rose slightly. "You read the roster." "I read everything." Vance glanced at the men behind him. One of them, his name tape read Grant, smirked. "She reads everything," Grant said. "Good. That'll help when she's trying to figure out where the latrine is." The others laughed. Not loudly, just enough. Claire did not react. "When do we start?" she asked. Vance's smirk faded slightly. He had expected something. A flash of anger. A flinch. Something he could use. He found nothing. "Oh, 400, he said. "Range work. Then fieldcraft. Then, if you're still standing, we run stalks in scrubland. And if I'm not still standing..." Vance stepped closer. Close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. "Then you go home," he said, "and we forget you were ever here." Claire held his gaze. "I don't intend to give you the chance." She turned back to her locker and continued unpacking. Behind her, the men exchanged glances. The barracks door slammed shut as they left. Claire did not flinch. She had been underestimated before. She had been dismissed, overlooked, tested, and pushed to the edge of every limit she possessed. And every single time, she had responded the same way, with performance, with precision, with silence. Because silence, she had learned, was the only answer that could not be argued with. The first week at the compound was not designed to teach her anything. It was designed to break her. Claire understood this the moment she arrived at the range on that first morning, 0400, with the sky still black and the temperature hovering at 28 degrees. The range was 1,000 meters of packed dirt and frost, with steel targets set at intervals of 100 meters out to maximum distance. Wind flags fluttered at irregular positions along the course, their movement barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness. Master Chief Calloway stood at the firing line with a stopwatch in one hand and a clipboard in the other. 5 rounds, he said. 5 targets. 100 through 500 meters. You have 90 seconds. Claire knelt beside her rifle case and began her pre-shot ritual. She opened the case. She lifted the rifle, a bolt-action precision weapon with a heavy barrel and a Schmidt and Bender optic mounted on top. She checked the chamber. She checked the bolt. She loaded a 5-round magazine and seated it with a soft click. The men around her were already in position. Vance was at the line to her right, his spotter's scope mounted on a tripod beside him. Grant was to her left, adjusting his bipod. The others, Jack Rohr, a wiry sniper with a reputation for cold-bore accuracy, and 2 men whose names she had not yet learned, were spread along the line. No one offered her a position near the heater. No one offered her the better hide site, 20 yards uprange, where the wind was partially blocked by a low berm. No one told her where the rangefinder was stored. She did not ask. "On my mark," Calloway said. Claire settled behind her rifle. She pressed her cheek to the stock. She aligned the reticle with the first target 100 meters out. The wind flag nearest her was angled at 45 degrees, but the flag at the 200-meter mark was nearly still. She calculated the difference. She adjusted her hold. Mark. She fired. The first target rang. Steel on steel. She chambered the next round, shifted her aim, calculated the wind shift between 100 and 200 meters, and fired again. The second target rang. By the time she reached the 500-meter target, 53 seconds had passed. She steadied her breath. She watched the mirage rising off the dirt in front of the target, barely visible, but there, a heat shimmer. It told her the wind was shifting left to right, maybe 3 miles per hour. She adjusted her hold 2 mils right. She fired. The 5th target rang. Claire lowered her rifle. She did not look at the men beside her. She did not wait for feedback. She simply reloaded and waited for the next drill. Calloway walked down the line. He checked each target through a spotting scope. He wrote something on his clipboard. When he reached Claire's lane, he paused. He said nothing, but she saw his jaw tighten, just slightly, just enough. She had beaten Vance's time by 11 seconds. After the range came fieldcraft. They marched 2 miles to a section of scrubland on the far side of the compound, a mix of dead grass, rocky outcroppings, and low-hanging pine branches. The ground was frozen solid. Every step crackled. "The exercise is simple," Calloway said. "Build a hide. You have 30 minutes. I will walk the perimeter and attempt to identify your position. If I find you, you fail." Claire studied the terrain. The obvious positions were the rocky outcroppings, natural cover, elevation advantage. but the obvious positions were also where Calloway would look first. She chose a different route. While the others scrambled for the high ground, Claire moved laterally, keeping low, using the dead grass to mask her silhouette. She found a shallow depression near a rotting log, unremarkable, invisible from more than 20 meters away. She began constructing her hide using materials from the immediate area: grass, cut branches, frost-covered leaves. She spread her weight across the frozen crust of the snow to avoid leaving footprints. 30 minutes later, Calloway began his sweep. He found Vance in 7 minutes. The spotter had built a technically perfect hide, but his boot prints led directly to it. He found Grant in 12 minutes. Grant had moved too quickly and disturbed a section of frost that glittered in the early morning light. He found Roar in 18 minutes. Roar had sneezed. He walked past Claire's position 4 times. He never saw her. After the exercise ended, Calloway gathered the team near the tree lean. "Harlan," he said. Claire stepped forward. "Your hide was effective, but you took a risk by positioning yourself near the log. If the wind had shifted, your scent would have given you away." "I checked the wind before I moved," Claire said. "It was steady from the northeast. The log blocked my scent downwind." Calloway's eyes narrowed. "You checked the wind?" "Yes, Master Chief." He stared at her for a long moment. "Next time," he said, "tell me what you did, not what I assume you forgot." He turned and walked away. Claire remained still. Around her, the men exchanged glances. Vance's jaw was tight. Grant's smirk had vanished. She had done more than pass the exercise. She had corrected the Master Chief, and that, she knew, was going to cost her. The retaliation began that afternoon. It started small. Her rangefinder, which she had charged the night before, was dead when she reached for it during the next range session. She estimated the distance using her reticle, a skill she had practiced for years, and hit the target anyway. The next day, her bipod spring clip was missing. She improvised a rest using her rucksack and made the shot. The day after that, the wind data card in her range book had been altered. The shift values were wrong by 2 degrees. She caught the error because a mirage didn't match the numbers. She ignored the card and called the wind herself. Every shot, every drill, every exercise. Claire did not complain. She did not confront. She did not ask for help. She simply performed. And with every perfect shot, the tension in the barracks grew thicker. On the 4th night, Grant dropped a comment in the chow line loud enough for everyone to hear. Funny how she never misses. Almost like she's got help. Claire was behind him, tray in hand. She did not slow down. She did not speed up. "What kind of help?" Roar asked, "Play along." "I don't know. Maybe someone's feeding her the wind calls. Maybe she's got better gear than she's supposed to." Claire set her tray down at the end of the table. Alone, she sat, picked up her fork, and began eating. Grant turned to look at her. "You don't have anything to say?" Claire chewed, swallowed, took another bite. No. She looked up at him. Her eyes were calm, flat, unreadable. "When your shots are as tight as mine," she said, "you won't need to explain them either." The table went silent. Claire returned to her meal. She finished eating in silence, washed her tray, and walked back to the barracks without looking at any of them. That night, as she lay in her bunk, she heard the wind rattling the windows. The heater clanked and groaned. Somewhere in the darkness, one of the men shifted in his sleep. Claire stared at the ceiling. She thought about Ethan Pierce. She thought about the wall that had crushed him, the concrete and rebar that had come down so fast there was no time to scream. She remembered the darkness, the dust, the way she had pressed her cheek to the rubble and felt for a draft, searching for a void in the collapse. She had found one. She had crawled through it, inch by inch, dragging herself toward the faint breath of outside air. Ethan had not. Ethan Pierce had been her first spotter. They had met during advanced training, 3 years before she arrived at the compound. He was 26 years old, from a small town in Oregon, with quiet voice and hands that never shook. He saw things she missed. Wind shifts at the edge of perception, temperature gradients that bent the air, the way a target's breathing pattern could predict the moment of stillness. They worked together for 14 months. 14 months of joint deployments, shared hides, and the kind of trust that only forms when 2 people depend on each other to survive. Then came Mosul. The mission was straightforward. Overwatch for a ground team, clearing a block of buildings in the old city. Claire and Ethan were positioned on the third floor of a half-collapsed structure, covering the main avenue below. The ground team moved house by house, calling clear on each one. At 03:17, an IED detonated 2 blocks east. The building shook. Dust filled the air. Claire felt the floor shift beneath her and grabbed for her rifle, but the structure was already coming apart. The ceiling dropped in sections, first a far corner, then the center beam, then everything at once. She remembered the sound, a low, grinding roar, like the earth itself was swallowing them whole. She remembered Ethan's voice, shouting her name, and then she remembered nothing but darkness. When she woke, she was buried. Her legs were pinned. Her rifle was gone. The air was thick with concrete dust and the smell of something burning. She could not see. She could not move. She could barely breathe, but she could feel. She pressed her cheek to the rubble beside her head and searched for a draft, a movement of air, anything that would tell her there was a way out. It took her 40 minutes to find it. A gap, no wider than her shoulders, angled downward toward what had once been the stairwell. She dug with her fingers, pulling loose stones free one at a time until the gap was wide enough to squeeze through. She crawled for an hour. When she emerged on the street below, covered in dust and blood, she saw the rescue team already digging. They found Ethan's body 2 hours later. The wall had come down directly on top of him. There was no gap, no void, no way out. Claire sat on the curb and watched them carry him out. She did not cry. She did not scream. She did not say a word. But something inside her changed that night. She had always been good at reading terrain, good at seeing patterns, good at knowing when something was wrong before anyone else noticed. After Mosul, that instinct became something else. It became survival itself. She learned to trust what she felt over what she saw. She learned to look for the gaps that no one else noticed, the structural flaws, the hidden voids, the draft of air that said there's a way out when every other signal said there isn't. And she learned that walls are never solid. There's always a flaw. You just have to be willing to find it. The memories faded as Claire lay in the barracks, listening to the wind. She had not spoken about Ethan since the day they buried him. She did not intend to start now, but his presence lingered in the way she checked every structure before entering it, in the way she positioned herself near exits, in the way she never, ever assumed that a wall would protect her. Outside, the wind picked up. The windows rattled harder. Somewhere in the compound, a door banged open and slammed shut. Claire closed her eyes. Tomorrow would be harder than today. She was ready. The second week brought stalking exercises into rain that would have broken lesser candidates. The course was 600 meters of pine forest, rocky outcrops, and open clearings with no cover. The goal was simple. Start at the far end, reach the firing position undetected, take a shot at a target dummy dressed in enemy fatigues, and extract without being seen. 3 instructors with spotting scopes watched the course. If they saw movement, any movement, the candidate failed. On the first day, Claire watched the men attempt the course. Grant went first. He made it 400 meters before an instructor called him out. He had moved too quickly between cover points, and his elbow had caught the light. Vance went second. He made it 500 meters before a shift in the wind pushed his scent toward one of the instructors. The instructor didn't see him, but he smelled him, the faint trace of gun oil and sweat. Roar made it to the firing position. But when he took his shot, the sound gave away his location. He was called out during extraction. Claire went last. She took 3 hours to cover 600 meters. She moved when the wind moved, using the sound of swaying branches to mask her footsteps. She pressed herself flat against the frozen ground and inched forward centimeter by centimeter, her body disappearing into the dead grass and pine needles. When she reached a clearing with no cover, she waited 47 minutes until a cloud passed over the sun and the light shifted just enough to create shadows where there had been none. She slid through the clearing in those shadows. At the firing position, she took her time. She settled her breathing. She aligned the reticle. She waited for a 3-second window. When the wind dropped to nothing, she fired. The target dummy jerked as the round struck center mass. She extracted by moving backward, covering her tracks, and taking a route that none of the instructors expected, a gully on the eastern edge of the course that was filled with standing water and rotting leaves. She emerged on the far side of the course 40 minutes later, wet to her waist and covered in mud. The instructors had not seen her once. Calloway was waiting at the extraction point. He said nothing as she approached. He simply looked at her, soaked, filthy, exhausted, and gave a single nod. It was the closest he had come to praise. That night, the dynamic in the barracks shifted. It was subtle, nothing spoken, nothing acknowledged. But when Claire entered the chow hall, Grant did not make a comment. Vance did not smirk. Rohr looked up from his tray, met her eyes, and looked away. She had not earned their respect, but she had earned something else. She had earned their uncertainty. They no longer knew if she would fail, and that uncertainty, she understood, was the first crack in the wall. The mission briefing came on a Thursday. Claire had been at the compound for 3 weeks. She had completed every exercise, passed every test, and performed at a level that none of the men could dismiss. But she was still an outsider, still the one who sat at the edge of the room during briefings, still the one whose name was spoken with a pause before it, as if the speaker wasn't sure whether to include her at all. She entered the briefing room at 0500. The room was small, a concrete box with a projector screen on one wall, and a table covered with maps, photographs, and intelligence reports. Calloway stood at the front, a remote control in one hand. Vance, Grant, Rohr, and 2 other snipers, men named Torres and Briggs, were already seated. Claire took her place near the back. Calloway did not wait for her to settle. "Gentlemen," he said, then after the slightest pause, "And Harlan," she did not react. "We have a mission, high altitude, remote border region. The target is a weapons convoy moving through a mountain pass. Intelligence indicates the convoy is carrying anti-aircraft missiles and heavy machine guns intended for hostile forces operating in the valley below. Our job is to interdict that convoy before it reaches its destination." He clicked the remote. The projector hummed to life, displaying a satellite image of a narrow mountain pass surrounded by snow-covered peaks. "The pass is here." Calloway pointed to a section of the image. Elevation, 9,600 feet. Average temperature at night, -15 Celsius. The convoy will move through the pass between 0200 and 0400. We will be in position before they arrive. He clicked again. A topographical map replaced the satellite image. "The approach is difficult. We will insert by helicopter at this LZ." He pointed to a flat section of terrain 3 kilometers in the pass, "and move on foot to the Overwatch position here." The Overwatch position was a rocky outcropping on the northern slope of the pass. It offered clear sight lines to the road below, but the approach was exposed. Anyone watching would see them coming. "Enemy presence?" Vance asked. "Unknown. Intelligence suggests minimal. The pass is remote. The convoy is traveling fast and light. They're counting on speed and isolation to protect them, not firepower. And if intelligence is wrong?" Claire asked. The room went still. Calloway's eyes moved to her. His expression did not change. "Then we adapt," he said. "We are SEALs. That is what we do." Claire held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. Calloway continued. "The sniper element will consist of 5 shooters and 3 spotters. Harlan, you will be positioned on the eastern flank of the Overwatch position. Your sector is from the pass entrance to the first turn in the road, approximately 300 meters. Eastern flank, the exposed position, the one with the worst cover, and the longest crawl to extraction if things went wrong." Claire did not argue. "Vance, you will spot for Rohr on the primary position. Torres and Briggs will cover the western flank. Grant, you will operate as my spotter on the central position." He clicked the remote again. The image zoomed in on the Overwatch position. The convoy consists of 3 vehicles. Lead vehicle is a technical with a mounted DSHK. Second vehicle is a cargo truck, primary target. Third vehicle is another technical, trailing position. We take out the lead vehicle first, then the trailing vehicle, then disable the cargo truck. No survivors. No evidence. Clean interdiction. He set down the remote. "Questions?" The room was silent. "Good. We move at 0200 tomorrow. Get your gear ready. Get some sleep. Dismiss." The men rose and filed out. Claire remained seated for a moment, studying the map. The terrain was difficult. The approach was exposed. And something about the intelligence nagged at her, the assumption of minimal enemy presence, the reliance on speed and isolation. She had seen that assumption before. She had seen it in Mosul. Calloway noticed her hesitation. Harlan, she looked up. Something on your mind? Claire considered her words carefully. The intelligence assessment. Minimal enemy presence. What about it? It's based on what we haven't seen, not on what we have. Calloway's eyes narrowed. Meaning the convoy is moving through a remote mountain pass in hostile territory, carrying weapons that are worth more than gold. And intelligence says they're not protecting it. She paused. Either they're stupid or they're confident. And if they're confident, there's a reason we haven't found yet. Calloway stared at her for a long moment. You think it's a trap? I think we should plan for the possibility. The silence stretched. He told her the procedure mattered more than a single shot. She did not argue, but did not soften either. Finally, Calloway spoke. Your concern is noted, but we go with the intelligence we have. That is the procedure. The procedure exists because improvisation gets people killed. And if the procedure is wrong, Calloway's jaw tightened. Then we adapt. In the moment, not before. He stepped closer. You want to survive in this element, Harlan? Learn to trust the process. Your instincts might be good. I've seen that on the range. But instincts without discipline are a liability. I need shooters who can hold their position, hold their fire, and hold their tongue until the moment is right. Claire met his eyes. And if the moment never comes because we're already dead? The question hung in the air. Calloway did not answer. He turned and walked out of the briefing room. Claire remained alone with the maps, the photographs, and the cold certainty settling in her gut. Something was wrong. She could feel it. The night before the mission, Claire walked to the equipment shed. The shed was a corrugated metal structure at the edge of the compound, filled with weapons, optics, cold weather gear, and the accumulated equipment of 2 decades of high-altitude operations. The air inside smelled like gun oil, solvent, and cold metal. Claire found her assigned loadout on a table near the back. Rifle, bipod, scope, ammunition, rangefinder, radio, cold weather kit, spare batteries. She went through each item systematically, checking function, checking condition, checking for anything that might fail in the field. The rangefinder was dead. She checked the battery compartment. The battery was swapped. The one inside was spent, replaced sometime between the morning's inventory check and now. She did not react. She simply walked to the supply cabinet, found a fresh battery, and installed it herself. She continued her inspection. The bipod spring clip was missing again. She reached into her personal kit, pulled out a spare clip she had acquired on the second day, and installed it. She picked up her Win data card and compared it to the master copy on the wall. The numbers were different. Again, she threw the falsified card away and copied the correct data by hand. When she finished, she packed her gear into her rucksack and walked outside. The sky was clear. The temperature had dropped to 19 degrees. The stars were bright enough to cast faint shadows on the frozen ground. She heard footsteps behind her. Harlan. She turned. It was Grant. He stood a few meters away, hands in his pockets, his breath visible in the cold air. His expression was unreadable. You found the battery. It was not a question. Claire said nothing. And the bipod clip. And the Win card. Still nothing. Grant shifted his weight. Look, I'm not going to apologize. That's not how this works. But he stopped, looked away. You're still here. After all of it, you're still here. Did you expect me to leave? I expected you to break. Everyone does eventually. Claire studied him for a moment. Everyone, she said quietly, isn't me. Grant's jaw tightened. But there was something else in his eyes now. Something that looked almost like grudging respect. The mission tomorrow, he said. Eastern flank. It's the worst position. I know. Calloway put you there because he thinks you can't handle the center. I know. You could ask for a different assignment. He might listen. Claire shook her head slowly. If I ask for a different assignment, I'm saying I can't handle the one I was given. Then I'm the shooter who needs accommodation, the one who needs protection. She met his eyes. I'd rather prove him wrong from the worst position than prove him right from the best one. Grant stared at her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, he nodded. Good luck tomorrow, Harlan. He turned and walked back toward the barracks. Claire watched him go. She did not trust him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But something had shifted. A crack, a gap, a flaw in the wall. She would take what she could get. The helicopter lifted off at 0200. Claire sat in the cargo bay with her rifle across her knees and her rucksack between her feet. Around her, the other members of the Element were silent, their faces lit by the dim red glow of the interior lights. The rotors beat against the air with a rhythm that vibrated through her entire body. She watched the terrain pass below through the open door. First the compound, shrinking to a cluster of lights. Then the scrubland, dark and featureless. Then the mountains, rising like black walls against a star-filled sky. The higher they climbed, the colder it got. By the time they reached the LZ, the temperature inside the helicopter had dropped to -8. Claire could feel the cold seeping through her gloves, her mask, her layers of cold weather gear. She flexed her fingers to keep the blood moving. The helicopter flared and touched down on a flat section of terrain surrounded by snow-covered boulders. Go, go, go! The team poured out of the cargo bay and spread into the darkness. Claire moved to her assigned position on the perimeter, rifle up, scanning the terrain through her scope. The rotor wash kicked snow into the air, reducing visibility to 30 meters. Then the helicopter lifted off, and the silence returned. Calloway's voice came through the radio. Element, form on me. We move in 2 minutes. Claire collapsed her scope covers and joined the others. They moved single file through the snow, following a route that had been mapped from satellite imagery, but never walked by human feet. The terrain was brutal. Steep inclines, loose rock hidden beneath the snow, and wind that cut through every gap in their clothing. Claire kept her head down and focused on the footprints of the man ahead of her. Step by step, meter by meter, kilometer by kilometer. After 2 hours, they reached the Overwatch position. It was exactly as the satellite imagery had shown, a rocky outcropping on the northern slope of the pass, overlooking the road below. The rocks provided natural cover, but the ground was exposed and the wind was relentless. Claire moved to her assigned position on the eastern flank. The crawl took 20 minutes. She moved slowly, carefully, keeping her profile low and her movements timed to the gusts of wind. When she reached her firing position, she settled into the snow and began constructing her hide. The cold seeped into her bones. She ignored it. By 0300, the Element was in position. Claire lay in her hide on the eastern flank, her rifle resting on its bipod. Her eye pressed to the scope. The reticle glowed faintly in the darkness, illuminated by a tritium insert that would last for decades. Through the scope, she could see the road below, a narrow strip of packed dirt winding to the pass, flanked by snow-covered slopes and jagged rock formations. The convoy was not yet visible, but something else was. Claire adjusted her scope and studied the terrain to the south. There at the edge of her sector, she noticed a disturbance in the snow, a line that ran perpendicular to the natural wind patterns. A track, perhaps, or something dragged. She keyed her radio. Overlord, this is flank east. I have visual on disturbed snow at grid reference Charlie 7. Possible foot traffic. How copy? Static. Then Calloway's voice. Flank east, Overlord. Hold position. Focus on your sector. Roger, Overlord. Holding position. She released the radio and continued studying the disturbance. The line ran for approximately 50 meters before disappearing behind a rock formation. It was too straight to be wind drift, too deliberate to be animal movement. Someone had been here. Recently, she keyed the radio again. Overlord, flank east. Recommending recon of Charlie 7 before convoy arrival. The track pattern suggests directional movement toward our position. A pause. Longer this time. Flank east negative. We do not have time for recon. Convoy is inbound. Maintain position and focus on your sector. Overlord out. Claire released the radio. She did not argue, but she did not relax either. She widened her scope's field of view and began scanning the terrain systematically. Not just her assigned sector, but the areas adjacent to it. The rock formations to the south, the slope above her position, the shadows where the moonlight did not reach. And that was when she noticed the second anomaly. A scent, faint, almost imperceptible, but there, carried on the wind from the southeast. Metal, warm metal. The kind of scent that came from a weapon that had been handled recently or from ammunition that had been exposed to body heat. Claire's stomach tightened. She keyed the radio one more time. Overlord, flank east. I'm detecting metallic odor from the southeast. Possible concealed personnel. Requesting permission to flank east negative. Hold position. Do not move. Convoy is 2 minutes out. Overlord out. Claire released the radio. Her instincts screamed at her to move, to reposition, to warn the others. But she had been given an order. She held position. 1 minute passed. Then 2. Then, in the distance, she heard the rumble of engines. The convoy appeared at the far end of the pass. 3 vehicles, just as the intelligence had predicted. The lead technical came first, its mounted DSHK visible in the pale moonlight. Behind it, the cargo truck. Behind that, the trailing technical. All elements. This is Overlord. Convoy is in sight. Hold fire until my command. Claire centered her reticle on the lead technical. She calculated the distance. 340 meters. She read the wind. 5 miles per hour. Steady from the west. She adjusted her hold. Her finger moved to the trigger. All elements, stand by. The convoy rolled closer. 300 meters. 250. 200. All elements, fire. Claire squeezed. The shot broke clean. The driver, the lead technical, slumped forward, and the vehicle swerved, crashing into a rock formation on the side of the road. Gunfire erupted from the other positions. Precise, controlled, devastating. The trailing technical's gunner fell. The cargo truck's tires blew out. For 30 seconds, the ambush was textbook, and then the night exploded. Muzzle flashes erupted from the rock formations to the south, the same formations Claire had flagged in her earlier reports. Automatic weapons fire raked the Overwatch position, kicking up snow and rock fragments. Claire heard the distinctive crack of rounds passing over her head. Contact rear. Contact rear. Vance's voice, tight with adrenaline. All elements. Shift fire to secondary targets. But the enemy had the advantage. They were positioned above the team, firing downward, using the terrain for cover. The ambush had become a trap. Claire rolled left out of her hide and crawled toward a rock formation that would provide cover from a new angle of fire. Rounds impacted the snow beside her. Close, too close. But she kept moving, her body flat against the frozen ground. She reached the rocks and pressed her back against them, her breath coming in sharp, controlled bursts. Through her scope, she could see the enemy positions. 5, maybe 6 shooters spread across a 50-meter front. They were dug in well concealed, and they knew exactly where the team was positioned. Overlord, flank east. I count 6 hostiles at grid reference Charlie 7, 50 meters south of my original position. They have elevation advantage. Request permission to engage. Flank east, engage. All elements, shift fire south. Claire raised her rifle. She found the first target, a man crouched behind a boulder, feeding a belt of ammunition into a Pecan machine gun. She aligned the reticle on his neck, just above the collar of his jacket. She fired. The man dropped. She chambered the next round. The second target was already moving, trying to reposition after his partner fell. Claire tracked him, led him by half a body width, and fired again. He fell mid-stride. 2 down, 4 to go. But the return fire was intensifying. Rounds ricocheted off the rocks around her, sending fragments into the air. She heard shouting from the central position. Someone was hit. Man down. Man down. Roar is hit. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands remained steady. Jack Roar was down. The sniper who had matched her on the stalk course. The man who had sneezed and lost the exercise but never complained about it. He was somewhere behind her, wounded, possibly dying. She could not help him yet. Not until the enemy was suppressed. She scanned for the third target. Found him. A shooter repositioned behind a fallen tree trunk, his silhouette visible against the snow behind him. She adjusted her hold, compensated for the slight downward angle, and fired. The round struck him in the shoulder. He spun, fell, and lay still. 3 down. Flank east. This is Overlord. What is your status? Overlord. 3 hostiles neutralized. 3 remaining. I have eyes on 1, moving toward elevated position at Charlie 7 Alpha. Can you take him? Claire watched the man scramble up the rocky slope. He was fast, using the terrain for cover, appearing only in brief flashes between boulders. Negative. He's using dead ground. I need a different angle. Hold position. Grant, Torres, can either of you get a shot? Negative. Overlord. We're pinned. The fourth hostile reached the elevated position and disappeared behind a rock formation. A moment later, gunfire resumed. Heavier now. Concentrated on the central position where Calloway and the wounded Roar were located. Claire made a decision. Overlord, I'm repositioning to Charlie 7 Bravo. I can flank the elevated position from there. Negative, flank east. Hold your position. We do not have comms confirmation on your... The radio dissolved into static. Claire tapped the handset. Nothing. The signal was gone, whether from terrain interference or active jamming. She couldn't tell. The words turned to chopped fragments, then silence. She was alone. The training told her to hold position, to wait for orders, to trust the procedure. But the procedure had not anticipated this. The procedure had said minimal enemy presence. The procedure had dismissed her warnings about the disturbed snow, the metallic scent, the anomalies that screamed trap. Claire rose from behind the rocks and moved. She crawled south, keeping her profile low, using the shadows and the natural contours of the terrain to master movement. The cold bit through her gloves. The snow soaked through her knees. But she did not stop. 30 meters, 50 meters, 70 meters. She reached Charlie 7 Bravo, a shallow depression between two boulder formations that gave her a line of sight to the elevated position. She settled into the snow, raised her rifle, and found the fourth hostile through her scope. He was crouched behind a rock, reloading his weapon. His hands moved with practiced efficiency. Claire waited. He finished reloading and rose to fire. She squeezed the trigger. The round took him at the base of the neck. He collapsed forward, his weapon clattering against the rocks. 4 down. Claire shifted her aim, searching for the remaining 2 hostiles. She found one, a man crouched behind the fallen tree trunk, firing toward the central position. She fired. He fell. 5 down. The 6th was harder to locate. Claire scanned the terrain systematically. Rock formations, shadows, anywhere a shooter could hide. The gunfire had slowed, but it had not stopped. Somewhere, someone was still shooting. There, a muzzle flash, barely visible from a position to her left, a narrow gap between 2 boulders that she had not noticed before. The shooter was well concealed, firing through a gap no wider than a hand. Claire did not have a clear shot. She studied the position. The boulders were massive, no way to shoot through them. The gap was too narrow for a reliable hit, but the shooter had to reload eventually, and when he did, he would have to move. She waited. 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 40 seconds. The gunfire from the gap stopped. She saw movement, a shadow shifting behind the boulders. She anticipated where he would appear, 2 meters to the right of the gap, where the terrain forced him to emerge to reload from a different angle. She shifted her aim. The shooter emerged. She fired. The round struck center mass. The man stumbled backward and fell. 6 down. The night went silent. Claire held her position for a full minute, scanning for additional threats. Nothing moved. No muzzle flashes. No shadows shifting. Overlord, this is flank east. 6 hostiles neutralized. Sector clear. Static. She tried again. Overlord, flank east. How copy? Nothing. Claire rose from her position and began moving back toward the team. She found them at the central position. Calloway was crouched behind a rock formation, his face grim. Beside him, Vance was applying pressure to a wound on Roar's leg, a through and through that had shattered the femur. Roar's face was pale, his breathing shallow, but he was alive. Grant and Torres were positioned on the perimeter, weapons up, scanning for threats. Briggs was dead. Claire saw his body lying face down in the snow, a dark stain spreading beneath him. Calloway looked up as she approached. Flank east. You repositioned without authorization. It was not a question. Comms were down. The hostiles were suppressing your position. I had the angle to flank them. Calloway stared at her. You disobeyed a direct order. Claire met his gaze. I neutralized the threat. If I had held position, they would have overrun you. The silence stretched. Vance looked up from Roar's wound. She's right, Master Chief. We were pinned. Another 30 seconds, and I know. Calloway's voice was quiet. Hard. I know. He turned back to Claire. We are not finished discussing this. But right now, we have a wounded man and no extraction. The convoy cargo truck is disabled. Lead and trail vehicles are destroyed. But we took casualties. Briggs is Kia. Roar can't walk. And the radio, he shook his head. We're blind. Claire studied the terrain. The original extraction point is 3 kilometers north. We can't carry Roar that far in his condition, not with potential hostiles still in the area. So what do you suggest? Claire pointed toward the stone structures at the far end of the pass. The remains of an old outpost, collapsed and abandoned decades ago. We take cover there. It's defensible. We can stabilize Roar and wait for the QRF. The QRF won't know we need extraction until we miss our check-in, which is in 4 hours. If we can hold that position for 4 hours, they'll come. Calloway looked at the outpost, then at Roar, then at Claire. For hours. Yes, Master Chief. He was silent for a long moment. Move out. They moved through the snow in a stagger formation, Grant and Torres carrying Roar on an improvised litter, while Vance walked point and Claire covered the rear. Calloway moved between them, his rifle up, his eyes scanning every shadow. The outpost was 400 meters away. It took them 45 minutes to reach it. The structure was a collection of collapsed stone walls and scattered rubble, the remnant of border posts that had been abandoned long before any of them were born. The walls that remained standing were chest-high in most places, offering cover but not concealment. The ground was littered with fallen masonry, broken timber, and snow that had drifted through the gaps. Claire studied the layout as they approached. The main structure, what had once been a guardhouse or command post, was partially intact. 3 walls stood. The 4th had collapsed inward, filling the interior with rubble. But there was enough space inside for the team to take cover, and the remaining walls would stop small arms fire. Set Roar inside, Calloway ordered. Torres, establish a perimeter on the north wall. Grant, south wall. Vance, cover the entrance. He turned to Claire. You're on overwatch. Find a position with sight lines to pass. If anyone approaches, I want to know about it. Claire nodded. She moved to a section of collapsed wall on the eastern edge of the outpost and found a firing position that gave her a clear view of the pass and the approach route they had used. She settled in, her rifle resting on a pile of rubble, and began scanning. The night was quiet. Too quiet. She checked her ammunition. 7 rounds remaining in the magazine, plus 2 spare magazines of 5 rounds each. 17 rounds total. Not enough for a sustained firefight, but enough to make a difference if the enemy returned. An hour passed. Then 2. Calloway moved between positions, checking on each member of the team. When he reached Claire, he crouched beside her and spoke quietly. You were right. Claire did not turn. About the trap, the disturbed snow, the metallic scent. You called it before we even arrived, and I dismissed you. She said nothing. Briggs is dead because I didn't listen. Claire lowered her rifle and looked at him. Briggs is dead because the enemy had better intelligence than we did. That's not on you. That's on whoever provided our intel. Calloway's jaw tightened. It's on me. I command this element. Every decision is mine. Then own it, but don't carry it. Not now. Not when we still have wounded men and 4 hours until extraction. He stared at her. You've lost men before. It was not a question. Claire thought of Ethan, of the darkness and the dust and the draft of air that had saved her life. Yes. How do you carry it? She was silent for a long moment. You don't carry it, she said finally. You learn from it, and you keep moving. Calloway nodded slowly. Keep moving. He rose and moved back toward the center of the outpost. Claire returned to her scope. The 3rd hour passed. Then, at 0647, Claire saw movement in the pass. Contact, she said quietly. 200 meters. Multiple hostiles. Moving toward our position. Calloway was beside her in seconds. How many? Claire counted. 8. No, 10. Armed. Spread formation. They know we're here. Can you engage? At this range, I can take 2, maybe 3 before they reach cover. But they'll scatter, and then we're fighting in the ruins. Calloway's face was grim. Then we hold. Torres, Grant, tighten perimeter. Vance, stay with Roar. Harlan, you have weapons free. Start thinning them. Claire raised her rifle. She found the lead hostile in her scope, a man carrying an AK pattern rifle, moving quickly across the open ground. She led him by a body width, calculated the wind, and fired. The man dropped. She chambered the next round. The second hostile dove for cover as the first fell, but he was a fraction too slow. Claire's second round caught him in the hip. He went down, screaming. The remaining hostiles scattered, disappearing behind rocks and snowdrifts. For a moment, there was silence. Then the firing started. Rounds cracked against the stone walls around them. Claire heard the distinctive sound of an RPG launch, a whoosh followed by an explosion that sent rubble spraying across the outpost. Somewhere to her left, Torres returned fire, his rifle barking in controlled bursts. The enemy was advancing. Claire shifted positions, crawling along the wall to find a new angle. She popped up, acquired a target, fired. The hostile fell. She dropped back down as return fire raked her position. They're flanking. Grant's voice. South side. I see them. Calloway. Torres, shift left. Cover the south. The firefight became chaos. Overlapping gunfire, shouted commands, the crack of rounds passing overhead. Claire moved constantly, appearing in one position to fire, disappearing before the enemy could track her. She counted her shots. 14, 13, 12. 3 more hostiles fell, but the enemy was still coming, and they were running out of time. Then Roar's voice, weak but clear, came from inside the structure. Master Chief, they're coming through the north wall. Claire spun. 2 hostiles had found a gap in the collapsed masonry on the north side, a section of wall that had crumbled enough to allow passage. They were already inside the perimeter, rifles raised. Claire fired twice. Both men dropped. But behind them, she saw more movement. More hostiles. More rifles. They were being overrun. Claire's mind raced. The north wall was compromised. The enemy was pouring through the gap, using the collapsed masonry as cover. Torres was down. She had seen him fall, clutching his shoulder. Grant was pinned behind a section of wall, trading fire with hostiles on the south side. Vance was with Roar in the center of the structure, both of them exposed. And Calloway was standing in the middle of it all, firing controlled bursts at targets that emerged from every direction. They were surrounded. They were outgunned. And in 30 seconds, they would be dead. Claire dropped back behind her position and pressed her back against the cold stone. Her breath came in sharp, controlled bursts. Her rifle was nearly empty. 6 rounds left. The enemy had at least a dozen fighters still standing, maybe more. The math did not work. She closed her eyes, and she thought of Ethan, the wall collapsing, the darkness, the dust, the way she had pressed her cheek to rubble and felt for a draft, a movement of air that told her there was a way out. Walls are never solid. There is always a flaw. Claire opened her eyes. She looked at the collapsed western wall of the outpost, the one that had fallen inward, filling the interior with rubble. Everyone had assumed it was impassable, a dead end, a trap, but Claire had survived a collapse before. She knew what to look for. She scrambled across the interior of the outpost, keeping low, moving toward the collapsed wall. Rounds cracked overhead. Stone fragments sprayed her face. She ignored it. She reached the rubble and began studying it. Not the obvious sections, not the massive blocks that weighed hundreds of pounds, but the gaps, the angles, the places where the collapse had created voids. There, near the base of the wall, where a large stone had fallen at an angle against a smaller section of masonry, there was a gap, dark, narrow, but there, a void that led to the collapse to the other side. Claire pressed her cheek to the rubble. She felt it, a draft, cold air, movement. There was a way out. She spun and shouted, "Exit now!" Calloway's head turned toward her. "What?" "There's a void through the collapse wall. It leads out. That wall is impassable." "No, it's not." "I can feel the draft. There's a passage through the rubble." Calloway hesitated. The gunfire intensified. "Trust me," Claire shouted. "I've done this before." For a fraction of a second, something passed between them, a recognition, an understanding. Calloway had seen her performance on the range. He had seen her pass every test, survive every sabotage, complete every exercise. He had dismissed her warnings once, and Briggs had died for it. He would not dismiss her again. All elements, he roared, fall back to the west wall, covering fire. Move now. The team responded instantly. Vance grabbed Roar and dragged him toward the collapsed wall. Grant broke from his position and sprinted across the interior, firing as he moved. Torres, wounded but mobile, staggered after him. Claire positioned herself at the gap and began pulling loose stones free, widening the void enough for a man to pass through. Go, she shouted. One at a time, Roar first. Vance shoved Roar through the gap. Claire heard him grunt as he squeezed through the narrow passage. Then silence. He was through. Torres went next. Then Grant. Calloway reached her position. Go, he said. I'll cover. Negative. Claire raised her rifle. I have rounds left. You go, I'll cover and follow. There was no time to argue. Calloway squeezed through the gap. Claire turned and faced the interior of the outpost. 3 hostiles were advancing through the north wall breach. She fired 3 times, 1, 2, 3. All 3 dropped. 2 more appeared on the south side. She fired twice. 1 fell. The second dove for cover. Claire fired her last round. The rifle clicked empty. She threw the weapon aside and dove through the gap. The passage was narrow, dark, and filled with sharp edges. Stones scraped against her shoulders, her back, her legs. She felt her jacket tear. She felt blood, warm against the cold stone. But she kept moving, forward, always forward. The draft grew stronger, and then she was through. She emerged on the far side of the collapsed wall, sliding down a pile of rubble into a shallow gully that ran away from the outpost. Calloway was there, pulling her to her feet. Vance and Grant were already moving, carrying Roar between them. Move, Calloway ordered. Follow the gully. Don't stop. They ran. Behind them, Claire heard the enemy reaching the collapsed wall. Shouts, confusion, the sound of men trying to find the gap she had discovered. But by the time they figured it out, the team was 200 meters down the gully, using the terrain to mask their movement. Claire led the way. She had crawled through a void in Mosul. She had survived when Ethan had not, and now she was doing it again, leading her team through a gap that no one else had seen, towards safety that no one else had believed existed. The gully ran for 400 meters before opening onto a flat expanse of snow-covered ground. Claire called a halt and scanned the terrain. Behind them, the gunfire at the outpost had stopped. The enemy had lost their corridor advantage. In the distance, she heard the sound of rotors. The QRF was inbound. Calloway moved up beside her. You found the exit, he said quietly. Yes, Master Chief. How? Claire looked at him. I felt it. The draft through the rubble. It's how I survived a collapse 3 years ago. She paused. Walls are never solid. There is always a flaw. You just have to be willing to find it. Calloway stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. It was the closest he would come to praise. The extraction helicopters touched down 18 minutes later. Claire watched as Roar was loaded onto a stretcher and carried aboard the lead aircraft. His face was pale, but he was conscious. He lifted a hand as the medics carried him past, and Claire nodded in acknowledgement. Torres was next, his shoulder wrapped in field dressings, walking under his own power but leaning heavily on Grant. Briggs's body was the last to be loaded. Claire stood at the perimeter while the others boarded, her eyes scanning the terrain one final time. The sun was rising now, casting long shadows across the snow. The firefight felt distant, a memory already fading into the cold mountain air. Calloway approached her. Time to go, Harlan. She turned and walked toward the helicopter. The flight back to the compound took 2 hours. Claire sat in the cargo bay with her back against the bulkhead, her empty rifle case across her knees. No one spoke. The rotors beat a steady rhythm overhead, and the men around her stared at nothing, lost in the kind of silence that followed violence. When they landed, the medical team was waiting. Roar was rushed to the surgical unit. Torres was taken to the infirmary. Briggs's body was carried to the morgue. The rest of the team assembled in the briefing room. Calloway stood at the front, his face drawn with exhaustion and something deeper, the weight of a mission that had gone wrong, and the men he had lost trying to make it right. Sit, he said. They sat. We will conduct a full after-action review in 72 hours. Everything that happened tonight will be documented, analyzed, and learned from. But before that, he paused. There are things that need to be said now. He looked at Claire. Harlan. She met his gaze. Stand up. Claire rose. Calloway studied her for a long moment. Tonight, you warned us of a threat that I dismissed. You identified anomalies in the terrain that proved accurate. And when the enemy ambushed it, you repositioned without authorization and neutralized 6 hostile targets that would have overrun our position. The room was silent. Then, when we were trapped in the outpost with no exit and no extraction, you found a passage through a collapsed wall that none of us knew existed. You led this team to safety when every tactical option had failed. He stepped closer. I have commanded this element for 6 years. I have worked with the best snipers in the teams. And tonight, your judgment saved every man in this room. Claire said nothing. Roar's in surgery. Torres will recover. Grant and Vance are standing here because of what you did. Calloway's voice softened barely. Briggs is not. And that is on me. But the men who survived, that is on you. He extended his hand. Claire took it. Welcome to the element. Harlan, for real this time. The room remained silent as they shook hands. Then, slowly, Vance rose from his seat. He walked over to Claire and stopped in front of her. I owe you an apology, he said quietly, for the battery, the bipod, the wind cards, all of it. Claire looked at him. I don't need an apology. I know, but you deserve one. He paused. You're one of us now, not because we decided to let you in, because you proved we had no choice. He extended his hand. Claire shook it. Grant was next. He didn't say anything, just walked over and nodded and sat back down. But when he returned to his seat, Claire noticed something. He had placed a small pouch on the table in front of her. Spare batteries. The good ones. The ones he kept for his own equipment. She picked them up and slipped them into her pocket. The transformation was not dramatic. There were no speeches, no ceremonies, no sudden outpouring of camaraderie. The men who had tested her, sabotaged her, and dismissed her did not become her friends overnight. But something had changed. In the days that followed, Claire noticed the small shifts. Vance glanced at her automatically when the wind shifted during range work, waiting for her read before calling his own. Grant started carrying spare batteries for her on loadouts, unprompted, unacknowledged. Torres, recovering in the infirmary, asked her to visit and spent an hour asking about her technique for reading structural voids. And Calloway, Master Chief Ryan Calloway, who had dismissed her warnings and nearly lost his team because of it, began including her in mission planning sessions. He asked for her terrain assessments. He listened when she spoke about anomalies. He trusted her judgment, not because he had grown to like her, because the corridor had taught him that her way of seeing was a survival requirement. A month after the mission, Claire was sitting in the chow hall when Roar walked in. He was on crutches, his legs still healing, but he was mobile. He made his way across the room and sat down across from her. Harlan, Roar. He set his tray down and began eating. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, without looking up, he said, You saved my life. Claire took a bite of her food. You would have done the same. Maybe. He paused. But I didn't have to. You did. She met his eyes. That's the job. Roar nodded slowly. Yeah, it is. He returned to his food. Claire, finish your meal in silence. Wash your tray and walk back to the barracks. The bunk near the door, the one with the worst position, farthest in the heater, was no longer hers. Somewhere along the way, Grant had moved her gear to a bunk in the middle of the row. No one had mentioned it. No one had asked permission. She settled onto the mattress and stared at the ceiling. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. The heater clanked and groaned. Somewhere in the compound, men were training, preparing for the next mission, sharpening the skills that kept them alive in places where survival was never guaranteed. Claire closed her eyes. She thought about Ethan Pierce, the spotter who had died in Mosul, the man who had taught her to trust what she felt over what she saw. She thought about the collapse that had killed him and the void that had saved her. She thought about the corridor in the mountains, the draft through the rubble, the moment she had raised her hand and said the words that led her team to safety. Exit now. Walls are never solid. There's always a flaw. You just have to be willing to find it. She had not sought belonging. She had not asked for acceptance. She had simply done her job, shot after shot, mission after mission, decision after decision, until the evidence was impossible to ignore. Respect was the cost of survival, and in the field, they had no choice but to pay it. The barracks fell silent. Outside, the first light of dawn broke over the mountains. Claire Harlan slept,